these are ridiculous times that we live in that we're excited for the third Thor movie. Like 10 years ago, who had heard of fucking Thor?
Yeah.
Never mind, Thor 3 is going to be really good.
Yeah.
It's a strange time that we live in. I saw a thing yesterday that Disney are looking to buy 20th Century Fox, which would mean effectively Marvel are buying the X-Men back from Fox.
Ooh.
And it wouldn't surprise me if the motivation was, well, if we just buy Fox...
Yeah.
We get the X-Men back, and then we could do several billion-dollar movies off the back of that.
Yeah,
That'd be quite easy to do.
Crossover actually done well. Yeah.
So I'd be quite excited to see if that actually comes off. That'd be good. Also, fuck Fox.
Yeah, fuck Fox.
It is Thursday, the 16th of November, 2017, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So we're recording early.
We are
today because Alice is off in Glasgow on our normal recording day, which normally at this point we'd plug your talk, but by the time this goes out, it's over and done with.
The talk will be done.
So how did it go?
It went well. Yeah,
did it go well?
It was good.
Excellent.
This is Glasgow. Is that on the 13th?
Yes, Monday the 13th.
I believe that's Glasgow Skeptics' 199th event.
Oh, very good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so their 200th is on the 20th, which is amazing, really, like 200 events.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
They put on more events than we do.
They do a lot of events. They do like one a week, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas we're probably on, our 50th event?
I've never fucking counted.
Well,
Jesus.
We've been doing it, 7 years, maybe? To October 2009 was our first...
No, so yeah, we're coming up like 10 years of Merseyside Skeptics now.
Yeah, okay, so it might be 8 years that we've been putting on speaking events. So we've probably done an average 11 a year.
I worked this out
88.
the other day that it's in about 15 months it's our 10-year anniversary. 10 years since we set up Merseyside Skeptics, which is kind of crazy.
It is nuts.
10 years.
It's a sizable chunk of my life.
It is.
And a slightly smaller chunk of your life.
It is.
And a massive chunk of Alice's life.
Terrific chunk
it's
of
like
time,
half of Alice's life.
It's not.
A third.
So that's so they've done 199 events, and you're number 199.
Yeah, didn't book me for the special one.
No, that's Dave Annick, I think.
Is it?
Actually, I'm allowed to say that. I can't remember if I'm allowed to say that. We'll find out if I'm allowed to say that.
Find out.
Exciting.
Find out
You've
the
got
hard
plenty
way.
of time to check, Mike. I think they probably are.
Leaked it.
Going classic double ginger for the 199 and 200. Classic Scottish, isn't it? That 201st event is going to be a bottle of Iron Brew on stage.
So what have you guys been doing?
I've been spending half my time in the vet with the dog, who
is
not badly sick by any stretch of the imagination, but he's been costing me a fortune.
Yeah.
So
I can recommend animal insurance.
So a week ago, he suddenly got a really badly swollen tail. And was bothered by it, like it was clearly causing him a little bit of pain. He was chasing around after his tail, not very happy with it. So I left it a few days to see if it would go down, and then I took him to the vet. The vet looked at it, said, yeah, it's definitely swollen. Poked around and prodded him for a bit, and then
7 years of vet school. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's swollen.
And then after we discussed whether he'd had any serious injuries, whether he'd been stepped on or trapped in a door or something, she decided that he must have just over-enthusiastically wagged it.
He's just over-wagged it.
He's been too happy and pulled a muscle in his tail.
That's ridiculous.
Which anybody who's ever heard anything about my dog would not be surprised. He is the most hyper-excited, happy
bundle of energy.
He's full of energy. He's got quite a strong tail, so it's not surprising that he's wagged himself into injury. So he's been on anti-inflammatories for like a week, which he's fine on. Like, he loves going to the vets, was super excited to go and be fussed by the vets. And he loves being on this treatment because he gets it on his food and it's great. He loves food, so he's very happy to take his treatment. So he's been on it for a week. It doesn't seem to have gone down at all,
right? Which
is a bit concerning. But then a week to the day that he'd been on this anti-inflammatory medication for his tail, his tooth dropped out.
That's not normal.
Yeah.
Okay.
His tooth just dropped out of his mouth.
Which tooth?
One of his back teeth.
Was he
which have
losing
got
his
3
puppy
roots. No, he lost his puppy teeth years ago.
Wow.
Just
okay.
an entire molar dropped out of his face. He didn't complain at all when it happened. Just started playing with it. So the first I knew of it was when I heard this really weird sound as he dropped it to the floor, then picked it up again, then dropped it to the floor again.
Oh,
And turned around and was like, what's he playing with? What's he found?
Which, oddly enough, is what I did when I had my molar out. I popped it
You
back
put it
in
back
again
in
as well.
Yeah.
So eventually I figured out it was a tooth, confiscated it from him, rung the vets, asked them what to do. They said to bring him in. So took him back in. She looked at it and said, it's probably nothing, to be honest. I'm not worried about it. It's come out complete. She was really surprised it had just fallen out so cleanly. But she said it might have been that he'd had an abscess under the tooth just from like pushing food in there and it getting a bit infected.
Yeah.
Then when he's gone on the anti-inflammatories for his tail, it's reduced the swelling of the abscess, released the pressure, and the tooth's
so the
fallen
tooth
out.
just dropped out. It's like a fat man taking off his belt.
So she said, keep him on the anti-inflammatories for a few days until you run out of the treatment, and that'll help with his mouth.
Yeah.
But it's probably fine, and as long as he's not bothered by it, then
Wow.
don't worry about it.
That seems remiss. It seems very
Well,
relaxed for a vet.
All 3 roots of the molar have come out virtually cleanly. 2 of them have maybe snapped a tiny little fragment off. She's not worried necessarily that he needs to go on antibiotics unless it bothers him. She's not worried that they need to go digging to find the extra little bits unless it's bothering him. He's totally fine, not even bothered.
So wagging his swollen tail, isn't he? Because you see, if anyone ever like sees Lupin, he wags his tail so hard that his arse wiggles as well.
Yeah,
Literally tail wagging dog.
Yeah. Yeah, he is a wiggle bum. And he was a handful at the vets when they wanted to weigh him and check his teeth and take his temperature and all things that require him to stay still. Taking his heart rate's a nightmare because he's breathing so loudly and he's so hyper and excited and full of beans. But he loves it. Like, he loves going to the vets because he gets fussed over. But yeah, so he's costing me an absolute fortune. They've also looked at his skin, which he'd had problems with, and they've given me some medicated shine. She's more worried about his skin allergies than about his tooth dropping out of his face.
Teeth dropping out, yeah. A bit of eczema. Yeah, that's something to worry about. Teeth dropping out, it's fine.
Probably fine. Probably nothing. So hopefully I'm not back with him again in a week with something else random.
So is he all right? Is he like
totally
okay
fine.
in himself?
Not bothered. Not
Doesn't
even
care.
bothered.
Just doesn't
He was
care.
a little bit clingy the day it happened. He followed me around, giving me a funny look the whole day. But I'd also been cooking in the middle of the day, which usually I wouldn't cook in the middle of the day. So I think he might have also just been hungry and hoping that I was going to give him something.
I thought you meant like he was giving you a funny look because like she doesn't normally cook in the middle of the day. Like, why is she doing things? I thought she just waited for other people to cook for her. Or
I cook sometimes. I made soup.
You did make
good
soup? It was good soup.
But the vet didn't put like a little plastic cone around his tail to stop him wagging it or anything.
They did tell
lines.
me that I was supposed to try and get him to rest his tail. But
How
then
do you do that?
It's just like to be a dick to him.
Yeah, be mean to him.
Or just be
he's
boring
not gonna
around him.
wag.
Just be really dull.
That doesn't work. He still just comes up to you and looks at you full of love and wags his little tail at you. He's so happy. The only thing I could think that would maybe stop him wagging his tail is to switch the fan on the cooker hob on because he's scared of vent noises. The only thing he's scared of. He's fine with everything else. He's been fine at bonfire night. He was basically fine when there were men stood outside of our window cutting down trees with chainsaws.
Right.
Not scared of anything, but absolutely terrified of vent sounds.
Is he scared of the ironing board as well?
Oh, he's scared of the washing maiden. And there's
the washing maiden being the thing that you hang clothes on. Just be clear for any American listeners who wonder that you've got some sort of slave in your house and she does the washing for you.
Some hired help.
Some Elizabeth, specifically
what
medieval.
What a friend would call a little treasure.
A little treasure. You got a little treasure. A medieval washerwoman.
A metal contraption that you hang clothes on. He's scared of that just because he knows that it might fall on his head.
Right.
So if his ball goes near that or near that, we've also got a broom in the house that you got us from Alnwick Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right, yeah, the Harry Potter broom.
If the ball goes near either of those, he won't go and fetch it. He'll sit down and look at you and be like, Can you go and get it? Because it's going to fall on my head.
Because
It's going to attack me.
I'd expected that broom to last maybe 3 or 4 minutes in the presence of Lupin.
Warren keeps wanting to throw it away.
Yeah, I've got mine somewhere. I have no idea where it is. My house is still in disarray from having previously decorated and then not had a chance to put everything back. QED got in the way. South Africa's getting in the way. So that broom could be anywhere.
QED does get in the way.
It got in the way of everything. But it's fine. It was all fine. But yeah, blimey.
No, the broom has survived because Lupin's scared of it. Scared of that, the washing maiden, and vents. I can't walk him near restaurant kitchens.
Okay.
Because he's terrified of them.
So on medical advice, we need to scare your dog so he doesn't wag his tail and it gets an opportunity to heal.
Because, of course, once he's scared, he puts his tail under and he doesn't move it. So
I fly out to South Africa today as the recording goes out.
Right, okay.
As the show goes out, not the recording was made. So,
which means you're missing Dave Annick
I'm missing Dave Annick.
Skeptics in the Pub.
I am missing Dave Annick doing literally The Best Magician is the name of his show.
Is the name of his show. Also, he's a pretty decent magician
He's pretty
as well.
good. He's pretty good. But he does like to overstate himself somewhat. And I feel he's reached. And I was looking forward to that show. I specifically didn't go and see him in Edinburgh for the reason of saying, well, I'll just see him when he's in Liverpool. And he's the day that I'm flying to Stellenbosch.
You had got South Africa booked when you went to Edinburgh. You could have foreseen this. We'd also had...
No one does that, though.
What, checks their calendar ahead of time?
No one checks their calendar.
Knows what they've got scheduled.
That was like in August.
Yeah.
There was no way I was going to say, right, I'll just think about the fact that in November I'm flying to another country, and in November we've also got Dave Annick, and I'm going to check those dates together.
When you consciously said to yourself, I'm not going to see Dave Annick in Edinburgh because I'm going to see him in November in...
You're expecting
Liverpool.
a far, far greater level of foresight and forethought than I've ever been capable of, Alice. And you've known me for years.
As discussed, you would have known the date, if you'd cared to look, that our event in November was nearly 10 years ago.
Nearly a decade
we
ago.
are coming up to
That
a
is true.
decade where you would have known in 2009... Wonder when the 2017...
I just have my calendar set up to every first and third Thursday it says I've got an MSS event.
So does mine.
Well then, so when you put in your calendar that you were going to be flying to South Africa, you didn't go, oh, I'm going to miss an MSS event.
I think I see the flaw in this plan. You're assuming he put South Africa in his calendar.
Well, I think what happened was... I think the South Africa was put in my calendar by someone else. I think I either got sent a meeting request, say like, oh, here's the thing, or I pressed the button, like Google says, oh, I can see there's like a thing happening on this day. Do you want me to add it to your calendar? And you go, yeah, all right, yeah. And then suddenly it's in your calendar, but you didn't actively put it in. That might have happened, or I might have put it in without realising. Or I might have put it in a different calendar. This is the thing, I've got my work calendar, my personal
all your
calendar.
calendars visible on your phone at the same time?
Through some systems, not through others.
This is a disgrace, Marsh. This is a disgrace.
I live a complicated life. I've got 2 job calendars. I've got a personal calendar. I've got the MSS calendar.
Yeah, but that's what phones are designed to do. They put all your calendars together.
They show them all together once the information's in. But if you're inputting through like Outlook for one, and then it doesn't bring in all the calendars through Outlook, but exports it from Outlook into your... There's reasons, basically. There are very good reasons.
There are good reasons as opposed to you're just shit.
There are some reasons.
Is this why we have to phone Nicola up to see if you're coming to the pub?
Partly, yes. Yeah, that is partly it. And also, I'm not in charge of what we do. I don't have that. Nicola prefers to be in charge of that stuff, and I prefer to let her. So that's all absolutely fine.
So, last episode, I talked about the surprisingly shitty state of the evidence for a link between artificial food dyes and hyperactivity in children.
Oh, yes, you did.
And honestly, when I started to look into that story, I had expected to find that the evidence showed there was no link and it was just a food fad, nature knows best, bullshit paranoia. And it might still be nature knows best bullshit paranoia. The state of the evidence right now doesn't convincingly demonstrate a link, but it doesn't categorically rule one out either. But I wondered, what else is there in this area which might be interesting to examine? So how about this email which came in from Sean? I would really appreciate if you could unpack this one for me. As a geologist, cohort studies and self-reported questionnaires are a bit outside of my area of expertise. And I think they're probably further outside of my area of expertise, but I'll give it a bash anyway.
Well, self-reported questionnaires, by this point, you're an expert.
Expert in those. So Sean provided a link to a study published earlier this year. The study was titled Sugar and Artificially Sweetened Beverages and the Risks of Incident Stroke and Dementia. This was published in the journal Stroke. The paper concluded artificially sweetened soft drink consumption was associated with a higher risk of stroke and dementia.
Okay.
Which is a fairly big deal. Artificial sweeteners are associated with a higher risk of stroke and dementia.
Yes, so that's your diet Cokes, that's all your diet drinks. Yeah. That's everything, basically.
All your diet pop. Now, we've talked about artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame, on the show before. And despite what the Mercolas and the health rangers might have you believe, aspartame is widely considered to be safe. A review from the European Food Safety Authority in 2013 concluded that it was safe for human consumption, including by children and people who are pregnant.
Speaking of the health ranger and pregnancy, did you see that he said possibly the dumbest thing he's ever said?
Recently? That's a high bar.
Well, it is a high bar, but I think the splash headline was along the lines of new research shows that people who've had chemotherapy, their children are likely to be less fertile or to suffer consequences if you've had chemotherapy.
What?
Yeah. But it's like, well, if you haven't had chemotherapy and you die of cancer, you're less likely to have the children. Like, if it's only the children you've had after chemotherapy, then ultimately it's going to be better for them to have existed than not. It's like you can't really do a good comparison in that way.
And if the children were born before you had the chemotherapy, well, you had chemotherapy because you had cancer. You had cancer possibly because of lifestyle risk factors, which could then be affecting the fertility of your children.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the chemotherapy either way.
Yeah.
What a ridiculous man.
Yeah.
So the US National Cancer Institute published a review which showed that there was no link between aspartame consumption and leukemia, lymphoma, or brain cancer. And in fact, the only people which need to worry about their aspartame intake are people who suffer from a condition called PKU, which is a rare genetic disorder which requires sufferers to carefully monitor their intake of phenylalanine, which is a metabolite of aspartame.
And that's PKU.
PKU.
And you have to measure your intake? Do you get like a special meter for that? Like one invented by
some sort of meter.
Egon Spengler.
Yeah.
Egon Spengler.
So if borne out, this study will be a pretty big deal. So I'm going to talk about the study in more detail in a couple of moments, but before that, I'm going to talk about a completely different study, the reasons for which are going to become clear.
I think a pretty big deal is what we're having a cabinet resignation over with Israel. This is a week out of date by this
old
point.
News by the
that's
time
true. She's probably Prime Minister by this point. The number of things are going to change in UK politics in the next week.
So in 1948, researchers started the Framingham Heart Study. This was a long-term cohort study looking specifically at the residents of the town of Framingham in Massachusetts. Framingham. 5,000.
Can you imagine being the police officer for Framingham?
Framingham.
Yeah.
Would it be pronounced that way in America?
Framingham.
They over-exaggerate the ham.
Yeah.
Framingham.
Turns out Americans over-exaggerate the ham. Someone sent me a link today to bacon-flavoured baby food. Like baby formula, but bacon-flavoured baby formula. Yeah, which I think...
like as in milk?
Like bacon-flavoured milk.
Yeah.
What? Why?
Well, because they like to exaggerate the ham.
But why?
But also, I didn't think babies particularly liked salty food, and bacon's usually quite salty.
Also, babies don't need their milk to be flavoured. They're pretty fond of the milk anyway.
Yeah, but they do love bacon.
That just makes no sense.
I'm going to have to talk to my wife about that one. So this was a long-term cohort study looking at the residents of the town of Framingham in Massachusetts. 5,209 adults from Framingham enrolled in the study in 1948, forming the first Framingham cohort. And data about their lifestyles and health outcomes has been recorded ever since. According to Wikipedia, data from the Framingham cohort demonstrated in the 1960s that smoking tobacco increased the risk of heart disease. It demonstrated in the 1970s that high blood pressure increased the risk of stroke. And in the 1980s, it demonstrated that high levels of HDL cholesterol decreased the risk of heart disease, and so on. The Framingham Heart Study is now onto its third generation, having started off with the original cohort in 1948, the offspring cohort in 1971, those being the children of the original cohort, and the Generation 3 cohort, which began in 2002, being the children of the offspring cohort.
Wow.
Or the grandchildren of the original cohort, which are not necessarily the same thing, because you could have opted out of being in the offspring cohort, but your kids could opt back into being in Generation 3.
Are the researchers also the children and then grandchildren of the original researchers? It's like through the generations, our family watch your family. It's just how it's done.
So there are some limitations to this sort of research. It can be difficult to demonstrate causation, even if you can demonstrate a strong correlation, because this isn't a controlled study, it is an observational study. And interpreting this kind of research can be difficult as well, because doctors have to assess how far the patients in the cohort resemble the patient they're examining. The Framingham cohort originated in one town in Massachusetts, which means the data may not be pertinent for populations with significantly different lifestyles. The cohort is also predominantly made up of white people, which limits how much of this data can be generalized to other ethnicities. But overall, data from the Framingham study is well regarded by epidemiologists. With that said, I'm going to return to the study from stroke.
Okay.
The data from this study are drawn from data gathered for the Framingham Heart Study, specifically from the offspring cohort.
Okay, so this is the middle generation.
Yes. So the authors took the Framingham Heart Study offspring cohort as their base of data. They then excluded everyone under the age of 45, everyone with an existing instance of stroke, and people for whom they possessed insufficient data to analyse.
Okay.
This left them with 2,690 people from the cohort that they can assess for risk of stroke.
They've got a fuckload of people to deal with here, haven't they? These are good numbers all round.
They're decent numbers in this study, which is nice. They then went back to the original cohort. This time they excluded everyone under 60, everyone with existing signs of dementia, and that left 1,395 people that they were going to assess for risk of dementia.
This is the grandparent generation?
No, this is still the offspring
Sorry, when
generation.
you said the original cohort, you threw me.
Yeah, sorry. What I mean is they didn't take a subset of the stroke data to build the dementia data. Both came from the offspring cohort as a source, and then ruled out various inclusion criteria.
Okay, gotcha.
So we now have two groups, one where we're going to look for instance of stroke and one we're going to look for instance of dementia. And no one in the dementia group has any existing dementia, and no one in the stroke group has had a stroke previously. Okay. So with me so far on that?
Yeah, with you.
Yeah. Now, as part of the Framingham research, people were asked to come in every few years and fill out a food frequency questionnaire, recording their diet over the previous 12 months. The authors refer to these as cycles. So the offspring cohort started in 1971, and I imagine cycle 1 would have been, a few years after that. For this study, the authors were specifically looking at the food frequency questionnaire data for cycles 5, 6, and 7. So those are the cycles which concluded in 1995, 1998, and 2001.
Okay.
So the authors took the data from cycles 5, 6, and 7 and then used that to assess A, the volume of sugar-sweetened drinks that the cohort consumed, B, the volume of artificially sweetened soft drinks that the cohort consumed, and C, the total volume of all sugary drinks consumed, including the sugared soft drinks, but also including things like fruit juice. Okay. So stuff that wasn't pop, but still had sugar in.
Yes, yeah.
So within the two groups we already have, stroke and dementia, we now have three subgroups. All sugary drinks, sugary soft drinks, and soft drinks with artificial sweeteners. Fast forward now 10 years to 2011, and the authors looked to see how many people in each subgroup had developed dementia or had one or more strokes. So based on the intake of sugar and sweetened drinks between 1995 and 2001, covering cycles 5, 6, and 7, the authors looked to see who had had a stroke or showed signs of dementia by 2011.
Okay.
The results showed that patients who had consumed artificially sweetened soft drinks more than once a week were at a statistically significant increased risk of stroke. And the patients who consumed artificially sweetened soft drinks more than once a day had a statistically significant increased risk of dementia. There were no significant correlations found for sugar-sweetened drinks or for the fruit juices.
Okay.
Now, before everyone rushes out and starts to buy sugar-sweetened Pepsi and ditches their Pepsi Max in the bin, there are some issues which need to be discussed surrounding this paper. So the numbers are pretty good. Thousands of patients that we're dealing with here, so that's nice. But ultimately, these are observational data. This is not a controlled study, so it cannot show anything more than correlation. These data cannot determine a causal link. It might be that there's something about developing dementia that makes you more likely to want a Pepsi Max. Who knows?
Is it that you've forgotten you've just had one?
Possibly.
Like,
that tastes fucking horrible,
yeah, like in Memento. You're just going to keep taking little sips of Pepsi Max and go, oh, yeah, it's time for Pepsi Max, isn't it? They literally forget it's Diet Coke time. And then someone just resets the clock again, like his wife does in Memento.
Can we do dementia jokes? Is that fine?
I think that's okay? A Memento joke.
You think?
No, it might be a bit of both. It's a Demento joke.
These data are also based on self-reported outcomes. Where members of the cohort are brought into the clinic once every few years and asked to estimate how much pop they'd had over the last 12 months.
Right, okay.
So we are dependent upon participants being able to accurately recall how much they've been drinking of what type of drink over the previous year. They may also underreport how much sugar they've consumed and overreport how much sweetener because they believe the latter to be more healthy, and so that's what the clinician wants to hear. How much sugary pop do you drink? Oh, not much, doctor. No, I drink sugar-free stuff.
Coke. Yeah.
Sugar-free stuff, me. So we have to contend with those kind of biases as well. The absolute risk of stroke and dementia was also very small. So 3% of the people in the cohort had a stroke and 5% of them developed dementia. So even if artificial sweeteners double that risk, it's still quite a small risk in absolute terms. And I would also be interested to see how it compares with the number of people who suffer complications from obesity or diabetes as a result of consuming sugared soft drinks.
Yes, yeah.
So we might actually end up with worse health outcomes from drinking sugared pop than diet pop, even accounting for the fact that diet pop might give you a stroke or cause dementia.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So those are a few of the high-level issues that I have with these data, but there are three more specific problems which I think are bigger than any of those. So first off, we have the statistics. The authors quote the change in incidence of stroke and dementia as a hazard ratio. So if a population has twice the incidence compared to control, the hazard ratio is 2. Because it's twice the incidence.
Yes, yeah.
If the population has half the incidence compared to control, the hazard ratio will be 0.5.
Makes sense.
Because it's half. So they quote hazard ratios for each of their comparisons, along with a 95% confidence interval. Now, I'm not especially au fait with the idea of confidence intervals, and Alice, you might be able to speak better to this than I can. Alice is shaking her head.
Mike, how comfortable are you with the idea of confidence intervals?
I'm about 95... No. So strap in, because none of us have any idea what we're talking about here. My understanding...
You didn't even ask me.
Because how are you going to know?
I might have some information on confidence intervals. I did statistics at GCSE. I did a maths A level.
Years ago?
I did a maths A level. How many years ago is that? That's more than I'd care to imagine. 16 years ago? 17 years ago? Bloody hell.
And more than half of that time, you've been running Merseyside Skeptics. So my understanding is that when we express a confidence interval, we are expressing a range of values which we believe contains the true mean for the total population. We know the mean for our sample because we've just worked it out, but we also know that our sample is not perfect. So rather than doing the naive thing and assuming that the mean for the population is identical to the mean for the sample, we provide a confidence interval, a range of values that we are pretty confident contains the true population mean. A 95% confidence interval says that we are 95% sure that the true mean lies within this range. Or, to look at it another way, there is a 5% chance the true mean for the population lies outside of this range.
Okay, yes.
So a 1 in 20 chance that the true mean for the general population lies outside of the expressed confidence interval.
And isn't that like a bell curve, basically, like a binomial kind of distribution bell curve?
So in this study, the 95% confidence intervals are huge. They are enormous, which indicates that either the sample is small compared to the population or the values within the sample are not very consistent. So, for example, one figure given in this study is a hazard ratio of 2.89. Doesn't matter which thing it's about, but the hazard ratio is 2.89. So you're about 3 times more likely to develop dementia in this case compared to control. The 95% confidence interval for this figure is 1.18 to 7.07. So they're saying the true figure for the population is somewhere between 1.18 and 7.07, which is a vast range. The true dementia hazard ratio for the population is somewhere between 20 and 700% if you drink diet pop. That's a massive range.
Yes.
They're not all that big. That's the largest one.
No, I'm just trying to work out what that actually means, because it's skewed, isn't it? Because you said the actual number was 2.8, did you say?
2.89, yeah.
2.8, and it goes from 1.2 to 7, so it's still very heavily skewed in the lower direction.
So you're looking at
higher
end,
a very left-leaning distribution curve with a long sort of right tail.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the width of this confidence interval, ironically, does not fill me with confidence.
No.
About how representative this sample is of a wider population. So that's problem number one, as those confidence intervals are pretty fucking big. Problem number 2, confounders. The authors try pretty hard to consider and control for potential confounders in this data, although doing this well is actually quite difficult. So we can't rule out that there are some confounding effects remaining.
Yeah.
In the results, they present 3 different statistical analyses, which they refer to as Model 1, Model 2, Model 3. Model 1 is minimally adjusted, so it's just the data as it comes.
Yeah.
They don't even publish that. It's supplied as supplemental information, but it's not even in the paper.
Yeah.
Because who cares?
Yeah.
Model 2
You'd be surprised what papers put in the supplementary information. Often it's like the core data from their findings.
Really?
It just goes in the supplemental information.
Yeah. It's not just the irrelevant stuff always.
But you'd think you wouldn't want to put the raw data in your paper, because people could then pick through the raw data unadjusted and go, oh, there's some trends here that I'm spotting, when actually there's adjustments for confounding.
Correct, but there are often things that you would expect to find in the paper that get left out of the paper and get put into the supplementary information.
So the data for Model 1 is in the supplementary information. It's not in the paper. Model 2 is adjusted to account for age, sex, total calorie intake, education, adherence to dietary guidelines, smoking status, and self-reported physical activity.
Blimey, that's a lot of stuff to...
It's a lot of stuff to account for.
Factor in.
So that's quite good, but there are still an awful lot of potential confounders on the table.
Yeah.
Model 3 adjusts for age, sex, education, total calorie intake, systolic blood pressure, whether you're undergoing treatment for hypertension, cardiovascular disease, total cholesterol, diabetes, waist to hip ratio, some genetic factors, and a few other things as well.
I'd like to know what's in the few other things.
I just couldn't be bothered listing them. It was
shoe size, whether you prefer tea or coffee.
I mean, they're important factors to consider. Yeah. Definitely important factors. And it turns out...
whether you prefer tea or coffee might be, because you're more likely to sweeten a coffee than a tea.
Yeah,
people don't put very few people sweeten a tea compared to you're more likely to have a sweetened coffee.
I don't think you've got any evidence to base that on.
Do you really don't think so? That's only because
sweet tea's not as popular in the UK, but an awful lot of tea in the United States, for example, will be sweetened tea.
Ah, would it?
Because they have sweetened iced tea generally rather than hot tea with milk we do.
Does iced tea count? I put iced tea back in the soft drink category.
Would you?
Yeah, well, it comes in a bottle cold.
I mean, it was on the sugar chart that we did.
Yeah.
I would too, but I think Americans are more likely to make iced tea rather than buy it in a bottle.
Are they?
Well, they're more likely...
I don't think you've got any evidence to back that up.
I think they're more likely to do it than we are, because we basically don't do iced tea.
No, iced tea's disgusting.
We have nice hot cup of tea.
It's weird classically, your builder's tea is lots of milk and 2 sugars or something. Is it weird when you meet a builder who says, oh, I don't have any sugar in my tea? Do you kind of want to say, what qualifies you as a builder?
He's probably not been building very long,
You've not been doing this long, have you, mate?
You know, they've not been building for an awfully long time. So Model 2 adjusts for several confounders. Model 3 adjusts for several other confounders, some the same and some different.
Okay.
And it turns out that while under Model 2 we get a correlation between artificial sweeteners and dementia, under Model 3 just isn't there. There's no effect. When we control for several potentially confounding health factors, the effect for dementia just goes away. Didn't stop the Daily Mail quoting the Model 2 data.
No, of course
obviously. But there is no effect for dementia when you adjust for several confounding health factors. So that just leaves the stroke data. Now, the stroke data shows a statistically significant effect under Model 3 as it does under Model 2. But even then, the data is a little bit weird. So they break down the analysis into recent intake of sweetener and cumulative intake. Recent intake they define as the intake of artificial sweeteners recorded during cycle 7 only. So only the data recorded at the cycle concluding in 2001.
Okay.
So when you came in for cycle 7, how much Diet Pop do you drink? This much, that's the figure.
Right now, yes.
Yeah. Cumulative intake, they define as the intake of artificial sweeteners recorded across cycles 5, 6, and 7.
Okay.
So the sum of those...
That's really weird.
It is really weird.
Why wouldn't they just take an average for the...
Because it's cumulative intake.
No.
I assume it means building up in your system for some way, somehow.
But that I get. That I kind of get because they're trying to get a bigger picture over a long period of time. But why just take the number 7 data, 7
instead
cycle
of
data,
a mean
instead
across
of
5, 6,
an
and
average
7.
across the 3? Because, like...
You might have just given up.
They might have been drinking it the whole time. They might have only just started. Like, it doesn't tell you anything.
It seems. Well, they think it tells you your recent intake, but then they waited 10 years to see if you had a stroke. So it was your recent intake in
A
2001.
decade ago, yeah.
There's no logic.
Which is peculiar. So in the stroke data, Model 3, recent intake, they quote a hazard ratio of 1.83. For cumulative intake, the hazard ratio is 1.59. So smaller.
For cumulative?
For cumulative. So the longer-term data, looking at cumulative intake over a longer period, gives you a smaller hazard ratio.
But it's the same people.
Same people.
Same data.
Yes.
Just not bothering to pay attention to 2 cycles.
Yes.
For some bizarre reason.
That is very weird.
It's peculiar.
Was there like a massive uptake in drinking of soft drinks in Massachusetts in that year? Like, are we seeing the effect of a very heavy targeted advertising campaign? So you're just saying like, oh yeah, I don't particularly drink soft drinks. Oh wow, they've launched this new Dr. Pepper. I definitely want to try this. I love this stuff now.
Well, that would be more interesting data though if they looked at people who hadn't had much in cycle 5 and 6. And then had loads in 7. But that's not what they've looked at. They've just said people that can have drunk as much as they want in 5 and 6. We're just going to only look at the data from 7.
But that's why the difference between that and the 5, 6, 7 one.
Yeah, but you can't know that until they've looked at that, gone into that data further, which they haven't done.
Mm.
So there is a higher hazard, a larger hazard ratio for the longer-term data, the cumulative data, compared to the recent data. The instance of stroke increases when you drink Diet Pop compared to not drinking it, but then reduces again a little bit if you drink Diet Pop for a long time.
If you're consistent.
That's got to be a misreading of it.
It's weird.
Would it equally not... Could it not be that the people in 5, 6, 7, if you drank a lot of it in 5 and 6 and less of it in 7... When you look at your risk in 7, you're looking at you not consuming a lot of it, but 5, 6, and 7, you've got healthier.
Possibly, but
so that shows that you are taking better care of yourself.
But then
also possible, also not looked at.
And this is across several thousand people, as well.
God, that's weird.
They also do a subgroup analysis where they look at ischemic strokes only, which are strokes caused by a blockage in a blood vessel.
Okay.
In this case, they report a hazard ratio of 2.02 for recent intake and 1.98 for cumulative intake. So again, reduced instance
about the same
on longer-term consumption, but probably not a statistically significant difference.
0.04.
They don't give a statistically significant figure for the difference between them. Don't give a p-value for that. So I don't know. But
if they haven't given a p-value, it's probably not significant. Almost certainly not significant.
There are also analyses looking at hazard ratio if you have more than one serving of Diet Pop per day.
Yeah.
So in that case, recent intake hazard ratio is 1.97, cumulative intake 1.79. So again, a reduction. Unless you narrow it down to ischemic strokes only, in which case for recent intake it's 2.34, for cumulative it's 2.59, so an increase this time.
Basically the data's too variable to conclude anything from it.
The data is all over the place. There's nothing in this data that's convincing me of a consistent trend.
They've fucking tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've cut it lots of different ways.
They're definitely p-hacking.
We might have expected that longer-term consumption would result in poorer outcomes just on a dose-response basis, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And
but again, that's not what they've looked at.
No. But all of this complexity brings me to my final problem with this paper, which is the multiple comparisons. So we have two groups that we're looking at initially, one where we're looking for stroke data and one we're looking for dementia data. Within those groups, we break it down into people who drink sugary pop, diet pop, or any sugary drink. We then split that down to never drink it, occasionally drink it, frequently drink it. We then split that into recent intake and cumulative intake. We split that into all strokes and ischemic strokes, or into all dementia and just Alzheimer's diagnoses. We also produced 3 models for each of those, adjusting for various confounders, and then we produced p-values for all of that.
And that's only the ones that are reported in the study.
Yeah.
Arguably, there could have been other analyses that they've done and gone, that doesn't come to anything interesting, I won't put it in. Because if you're doing that many, it seems strange. It seems likely that you've done some others as well.
Oh, yeah.
So it is no wonder that some apparently significant results are dropping out of the arse of this study when you're doing so many comparisons and carving the data up so many ways. You take any random data set and look at it from enough directions, you're going to find spurious correlations with the appearance of significance. And there are some statistical tricks you can use to adjust for multiple comparisons. Yeah. They just haven't deployed them. From the paper, they say, we did not adjust for multiple comparisons, meaning some findings might be attributable to chance.
Oh, good.
Which is nice of them. So all in all, these are interesting data, but the study has got several issues. Multiple comparisons, wide confidence intervals, the potential for uncontrolled confounders, the potential for recall bias in the food questionnaires, the apparent inconsistency in the long-term trends. So before I consign my Creative Pepsi Max to the bin, I'd like to at least see these data replicated in a properly controlled study, targeting the specific variables which have been defined here. But until then...
So I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I exercise enough. I'm not like Mike, hitting the gym. It is shorts and top and T-shirt and trainers and all the stuff he apparently does these days.
Slamming the gym.
That you've got these days.
Slamming the gym.
Hitting it hard.
No, I've long since packed that in.
You packed that in.
Long since packed that in.
How long do you do that for?
A few weeks or something.
It was a couple of months.
You did stick with it for a bit.
I got busy and tired.
And so, all right, so
fed
you're
up of aching
not
constantly.
exercised as much. I'm not like you. I'm also not like Alice, who doesn't need to exercise because she's just lucky that her disability means that walking around just keeps her joints from dislocating. And that works the muscles more than most exercise regimes could. You lucky bastard, Alice. I'm not fortunate like you. I'd have to exercise to stay fit. You get it easy. I don't really have an excuse. I'm just lazy. I work from home. I could be exercising at home between bouts of work. I don't do as much as I should. Though if I did want an excuse as to why I don't exercise, I could look no further than an article that was in the Mail earlier this year. Headline, back pain is turning gyms into no-go zones for Britons. 2/5 aren't exercising because of discomfort. It says agonising back pain is turning gyms into no-go zones. Experts have warned on the back of new research. I don't think they're punning on back on the new research.
I'm seeking puns here, but I think it's because you're saying it.
I'm saying it in a sort of a punny voice as well. 2/5 of adults are avoiding exercise as a result of the intense discomfort in their lower back, while the pain and twinges in the neck has deterred a quarter from exercising for up to a month, a survey has found. At this point, the mention of a survey almost certainly means that everybody listening to this has guessed what the next sentence is, which coincidentally is the 4th paragraph, and it reads, the worrying findings of little more than 2,000 adults were commissioned by the British Chiropractic Association.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I bet they've not got a jot of evidence for that.
So far, so bad PR, so predictable. What's actually really disheartening in this is that the full press release on the BCA's website, which Stephen Matthews' article in the Mail is heavily based on, if not the article that's on the BCA, then the press release that was then written into an article on the BCA's website. And it also includes the following just on the BCA's website. The director of football at Queen's Park Rangers and former footballer Les Ferdinand is supporting the BCA's campaign and comments, chiropractors have been a massive help to me throughout my professional football career. The chiropractors I've seen have managed to keep me going and avoid more invasive treatment on a number of injuries. They've allowed me to continue training and resolve underlying issues which might have prevented me training or playing.
It's their season ticket holders, that's what it is. They're just keeping him gainfully employed so he can go to a doctor.
Well, this is really disappointing to me as a Newcastle fan because this is So Les, this is Les Ferdinand, the
Yeah.
legend of Newcastle. He spent 2 years playing for Newcastle United in 95 and 96. He scored 50 goals in 84 games. That's really, really good. He was brilliant. He flew a helicopter about. He was brilliant.
You think how many goals he could have scored if he hadn't had his back hurting from all those spinal adjustments that he'd been getting?
I'm genuinely a bit disappointed. I genuinely am. But when they're not
Never meet your
convincing,
heroes; they're all woos.
never read your heroes' opinions on health.
Louise Jameson, who was she played Leela in Doctor Who in the 70s. She's a patron of the British Homeopathic Association.
Really?
It's like,
Apparently Beckham is as well.
Is he?
I've read some. Well, they cite Beckham as like he's a big fan of homeopathy. I haven't seen him say too much about it, but it's a shame. He seems like a nice man.
I mean, Louise Jameson's lovely. I had her at a convention for a while. She was phoning up other celebrities saying, "Come to this convention. It's brilliant." It was nice, but
She won't do that for QED.
No,
There's no way she does
No.
QED. But, when they're not convincing 90s footballing icons to shill for their dodgy PR, chiropractors have had a relatively easy ride on this show of late, I'd say. Certainly in comparison to things like psychics and homeopaths and, in fairness, Ben Goldacre. I don't think it's for any particular reason other than that our focus on homeopathy sort of stemmed from 1023 in the early days, and we spent a lot of time looking at homeopathy because of that. And then latterly, my work with Good Thinking Society, which obviously has kept me looking at homeopathy because we've been doing a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Enfield has stopped funding homeopathy as a result of the consultation that
good.
happened. So that's a very positive thing. And my understanding is things are moving throughout London as well. So this isn't just Enfield; it's spreading throughout London. That same action. So I think we should see a significant fall in homeopathy in London.
Toss that relatively major announcement out there in the middle of your story.
Yeah, just throw it out.
Just throw it out there. You have so many of them these days. You could just discard them. It's not a problem.
I mean, I could go further, but I'm not sure I can go on the record about it just yet. But keep an eye on London. There's some very, very interesting things happening. That
by the way,
will come to light.
they banned Woo. Just all of it.
Just stop.
Just packed it all in.
Well, unfortunately, that's not true. Unfortunately, the British Homeopathic Association are currently fundraising to bring a judicial review against the Department of Health, against NHS England,
I saw that.
for their consultation on homeopathy. Now, hopefully, it's something we're keeping an eye on. But they've raised like $9,000 in like 2 days.
Yeah.
So that's good. I wish there was enough money floating around skepticism to be able to raise $9,000 in 2 days off the back of it. People just don't have the money. Whereas if you look at the people who donated to the homeopaths one, you just go down, there's £1,000 from the Homeopathy Research Institute. There's £1,000 from Homeopathy Action Trust. Turns out when you make a living selling bullshit, you've got money to spend on protecting that bullshit from the light of a well conducted consultation. Anyway, going back to chiropractic, I don't want the fact that we haven't covered it as extensively as homeopathy to give the impression that it's anything other than total bullshit, which it genuinely is. Some people might not be too familiar with chiropractic, so we haven't talked about it for a little while, especially those of American persuasion, where chiropractors seem to be even more commonplace and even more confused with legitimate medical professionals.
They seem to be more accepted as just a chiropractor, is just a specialist back doctor.
Yeah, it's seen that way, but
it is viewed that they're not.
But
that's how it's viewed. Yeah,
and even here it is. I mean, a lot of people get surprised to hear that chiropractors aren't legitimate health, like back specialists.
Yeah,
but are based on the notions that the spine has an innate flow of energy which flows up and down it, and blockages in which are responsible for diseases, ill health, and basically everything. Chiropractors call those blockages subluxations, and although there's absolutely no evidence that subluxations exist or energy does flow up and down the spine, the entire practice of cracking the back in order to relieve symptoms stems from that unproven belief. It's complete nonsense.
That's chiropractic subluxations that definitely don't exist, rather than partial joint
there is
dislocations, which are termed subluxations as well.
A genuine thing called a subluxation as well, isn't there?
No, that's a fair class.
It's why I call all my partial dislocations rather than subluxations, because all my mates are skeptics.
Yeah,
so.
skeptic fella to pick you up on that. Subluxations are you, Alice? Yeah.
There's also luxations and superluxations.
Are there?
No.
There should be superluxations. I'm not sure what a superluxation would be. It flows too well. It's like a motorway through there. The energies are zipping up and down. People can be pretty blasé about chiropractors, even when they know it's nonsense. Even the people who don't believe that illnesses such as IBS or deafness, as was the original claim for chiropractic, even if they don't believe that those are related to these fictional blockages in the spine, people often tell you that, well, it looks like it'd be relaxing, or it looked like it might be kind of an interesting kind of relief kind of sensation or a placebo effect.
It always startles me quite a lot when people think that chiropractic is likely to be harmless. It's like, you're asking somebody to crack your spine.
Yeah.
Like, if you fuck up your spine, that's it. Like,
I think the reason people think it's harmless is like they associate with like cracking your knuckles, which is like, oh, my knuckles feel a bit tight. Oh, that's better. Which is a totally different thing. That's just air pockets or in the synovial fluids in the joints, I think, and you're sort of moving the air, getting the air out of those joint bits. So that's not a bad thing. There's no evidence that cracking your knuckles is harmful in any way. Mm-hmm. And there was a long-term study done by a guy who won an Ig Nobel Prize, I think, where he spent his entire life just cracking the knuckles of one hand and not ever doing the other hand.
To see if he got arthritis in one hand.
One hand, but not the other.
And he never did.
Yeah.
So, but I think people, I'm just guessing, but I think that might be a thing, is that people associate the cracking of your spine with the cracking of your joint knuckles and think, oh, it's nice there, so maybe it would be nice there.
And then they forget that your spine kind of protects all your central nervous system. Yeah. That's where it lives.
Yeah. Or people will relate it to like a heavy sports massage or a deep tissue massage, something like that. And setting aside the claims that it's a useful placebo, I know my place, Mike. I'm not going to step on that territory. The massage justification would only hold true if the massages were effective and harmless. How relaxing a manipulation is might be in the spine of the beholder, but just try watching footage of spinal adjustments on YouTube and it'll really make you wince, especially watching the adjustments that are done on newborn babies and hearing the little pop sounds of their barely formed spines. Not my idea of relaxation at all.
Alice is looking quite uncomfortable at that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so weird just seeing like twisting babies.
Yeah.
Don't twist babies.
Also, baby yoga. Have you seen when they do baby yoga?
No.
Where they kind of hold the baby by both arms, just kind of spin them about a bit and juice the thing. And
that's not baby yoga.
But they've got floppy joints.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a good thing to do.
That's why they can do this. Go. That's great for radio, isn't it? I'm gesticulating wildly here.
There.
But yeah, they kind of hold the baby by both arms and kind of spin it around so they put it over the back of their head and bring it forward again.
They should do that.
You could see this on YouTube. If you go Google for baby yoga, you'll see
there you
doing
go.
this.
Listeners, go off and do that. Once you finish Googling for babies having their spines popped and cracked.
Don't do that. And don't Google black salve either. But,
no.
That's just standard. Not related to this story, just standard advice. Never Google black salve.
The fact that chiropractors are willing to treat newborn babies at all is a major issue and puts paid to the notion of the harmlessness of this pseudoscience. A couple of years ago, my colleague Laura Thomason at Good Thinking Society actually made calls to the first 10 chiropractors she found in her area, looking up on the kind of the registry, and asked them specifically whether they'd be able to help treat her fictional baby's colic.
Yeah.
And she found that half of them were willing to. Others were a bit on the fence about it, but half of them were definitely willing to. Some of whom went on to say, on to then give her some very worrying advice on vaccinations and autism and even more than that.
And wasn't colic the specific issue that Simon Singh had the run-in with the BCA over? He'd said there wasn't a jot of evidence.
Yeah.
People are going around saying they could treat colic and they've got, they're the acceptable face of chiropractic, etc., etc., etc.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the reasons that we used colic as that example, just also because it is clear that chiropractic, there's no evidence it will help for it.
Yeah.
We know that already, so it's well established. So the fact that these 5 chiropractic clinics and 17 chiropractors associated with them were making these claims about colic and were saying not just that, yes, you can treat colic, but literally we saw babies yesterday that we treated for colic. It's pretty bad, the fact that they were making these claims. And so that's why Laura made complaints to the General Chiropractic Council, the regulator of chiropractors, over these clinics. And I'll come back to those complaints a little later. Babies aren't the only at-risk group when it comes to chiropractic, though. Because the movements of the spine that are done by chiropractors, they can be pretty violent. In chiropractic terms, they call them high-velocity, low-amplitude, which means we don't move it very far, but we move it fucking quickly.
Yeah.
Which is really dangerous. Because the vertebrae of the back, the vertebrae aren't designed to withstand these kind of high-velocity movements, problems can occur. The higher up the spine you move, the closer you get to the brainstem, the more severe those problems become. chiropractic manipulation has been shown to raise the risk of a stroke significantly. In fact, Kevin Sorbo, the actor who played Hercules in the TV show Hercules, suffered a stroke in 1997 as a result of a chiropractic session.
Oh, really?
A lot of people didn't know this. He was left paralyzed partially and had to spend a long time getting full motility back. Mobility, one of the two.
Mobility?
What's motility? It's a thing.
It is a thing.
Is it knowing about sperms?
I've only ever heard it in reference to things like sperm, yes.
Okay.
Like the motility of the tail.
So if Kevin Sorbo...
Was it something moving in liquid, maybe?
If Kevin Sorbo moving through liquid is motility.
I'm not sure.
Let's have a butcher's.
I'm not sure what the strict definition of motility is.
I don't know. I mean, I've said it now. So it's not written in my script. This is me just talking off the top of my head. So I'll carry on filling. But it does mean that if Kevin Sorbo does have motility, he might be like a sperm.
He might be like a sperm.
He may be sperm-like. What do we have on motility,
in
guys?
biology, it's moving or capable of moving spontaneously.
Oh, he can't move spontaneously. He has to have a reason.
But it can also be referred to an organism's ability to move food through its digestive tract, i.e. through peristalsis. So you'd have intestinal motility.
Okay, so Kevin Sorbo can't have motility unless he moves spontaneously. And if anyone's ever seen him in any of his acting work, I'm not sure his movements are particularly spontaneous or particularly driven by an innate sense of what he's meant to be doing. But anyway, he lost some mobility. He also suffered a permanent loss of vision, around 10% loss of vision permanently, persistent migraines, and a predilection towards making films in which he pretends to be an atheist who suddenly sees the light. That should actually be one of the listed side effects of chiropractic, like warning may cause God. Because I don't know, I haven't seen any evidence that he was evangelical Christian before 1997. But certainly since then, he's made God Is Not Dead. He's made the new one, Let There Be Light, I think it is. Have you seen this?
I haven't, no.
They reviewed it on God Awful Movies. I think it was co-produced by Sean Hannity, the Fox contributor.
Yes,
Nut job.
Wow.
But apparently, without spoiling the God Awful Movies review of it, the end of the film is that he's an atheist who's like an arsehole and drunk and things, but then he sees the light after like having a car crash and having a vision of his dead son. And so he gets back together with his wife, who then gets cancer, and her dying wish that they work on together is to develop an app that will use the light on your camera, on your phone rather, at exactly 3:00 in the morning, that you can then point it up to the sky and it'll turn your light on for everyone's phone who's got this app at 3:00, and then all the lights together will point up and you'll be able to see it from space, and so God will see the light.
Okay.
That's the ending, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll be able to see a phone light from space.
No.
So that can happen to you if you see a chiropractor.
Okay.
So that's a worry. I think he wrote the film as well.
You can also suffer a substantial loss of viewing figures in deference to your far more popular spin-off series.
That is also true. Still, sadly, not everyone comes out of their encounter with chiropractic as relatively comfortable as Kevin Sorbo does. And this brings us to another story, again from the Mill. The same paper that only a month or two earlier was promoting chiropractic in the first story that I mentioned. This one is a far less credulous and far more critical and, unfortunately, far more tragic story. It tells the story of John Lawler, who is an 80-year-old from York, who died after receiving chiropractic treatment that he received for his lower backache. The chiropractor who administered this treatment was Dr. Arlene Shelton of the Chiropractic First Clinic in York, which I think I've seen that clinic in person when I went to York to get this in the pub at one point. I could be wrong, but I did have a wander around. I thought I'd seen that one, but I can't quite remember. It's worth highlighting that while the Mail refers to her as Dr. Shelton, Arlene is not a medical doctor. She's a doctor of chiropractic.
Right.
The Mail might not realise that there's a difference, and many people don't realise that there's a difference, but that difference is very, very important. In fact, Shelton would be in breach of advertising regulations if she were to advertise herself as Dr. Arlene Shelton for that very reason, because you're not allowed to give the false impression that you are a medical professional when what you actually are is a chiropractor. That's probably why on the bio of her website she doesn't say Dr. Shelton. What she does say in her bio is still pretty shocking. I'll read out a little excerpt from it before I carry on. She says, "I'll forever be dedicated to sharing the health benefits of chiropractic. The choice we make daily for our family are those which support health and wellness. I'm passionate about the science of human wellness and feel morally obligated to educate my patients on ways to increase health and well-being through eating, thinking and moving in ways congruent with our bodies." She says, I love spending time with my husband, our 3 children. Chiropractic is a lifestyle for our family. This includes good nutrition, regular exercise, plenty of time outdoors, little screen time, and regular chiropractic care. Yes, all 5 of us are adjusted regularly. Our children were adjusted the day they were born. 2 were home births, and I continue to check their spines regularly. There is a saying in chiropractic, if the twig is bent, so grows the tree. So I'm pretty disturbed, not just about the fact that she's adjusting her babies from birth, but also the fact that they were home births too. And I'd be really interested and a bit worried about what her holistic advice about bringing up children actually is when it comes to things like vaccination, because one of the things we've seen is that there is a prevalence throughout the chiropractic industry of anti-vaccinationary message.
Yeah.
So that's all pretty concerning before you take into account what happened with Mr. Lawler.
Sure.
According to the Mail, Arlene Sholton was actually arrested on suspicion of manslaughter in the death of Mr. Lawler after the staff at Leeds General Infirmary notified the police that something was amiss with this chap's death. She's subsequently been released pending further investigations, and we may well hear more about the police side of things in the future. Certainly there's not much comment, and she hasn't commented on things, and I wouldn't want to say too much about that and end up being potentially prejudicial of a case that's ongoing. But obviously, this was something that the regulator of chiropractors, the GCC, had to investigate and address. It's one of their members been arrested for manslaughter.
Yeah.
It's no surprise then that they met on September 28th to discuss Sholton's arrest for manslaughter and what to do about it. What might be surprising is that they made a decision not to suspend her. She was arrested for manslaughter, only released pending further investigations, and yet the GCC didn't think that was a high enough bar to warrant a case to suspend her from practice.
Well, they suspend her from practice until pending the outcome of the case. Nope. If she's found innocent, then, okay, great, well, you're reinstated, but...
Nope, she's currently free to continue seeing patients and is currently still practicing and seeing patients as we speak.
Wow.
That, to me, is astonishing. I mean, I honestly, I wish I was more shocked. I genuinely do. But unfortunately, this is symptomatic of something we've seen quite a bit with chiropractors and the General Chiropractic Council. This is a very extreme case. There's no doubt about that. But I've also seen chiropractors who've stated, for example, that they believe vaccinations lead to autism and that they themselves have given chiropractic treatment to autistic children, and immediately after their session, as they say, the kid can maintain eye contact, which they couldn't before. I've seen those claims made. I've seen them claiming that subluxations lead to developmental disorders, that chiropractic has been used to treat cancer successfully. I've seen chiropractors saying that they personally treat children who've been driven to suicide attempts as many as 5 times, driven due to the prescription medication that they're on, and point out that chiropractic is a safe alternative to that medication. I've seen them even outright stating that asthma inhalers directly cause asthma. I mean, that last one seems like it's the least shocking, but it seems the most cut and dry. And when those claims by chiropractors were put to the GCC in a complaint, what happened? The committee found no case to answer there either. They even said, the committee, that there is no reason to believe that a chiropractor was discouraging the use of asthma inhalers when that chiropractor said, quote, "Putting kids on inhalers because of breathing problems as a child is definitely going to cause asthma. But we never talk about that. It creates asthma. It's a stupid thing, and we don't talk about it."
But that's not discouraging the use of an inhaler, then?
No, apparently not. Apparently not.
Wow.
Apparently it would be unreasonable to assume that statement might cause parents to stop giving their kids asthma inhalers. And looking back at those complaints that my colleague Laura made about those chiropractors who said they could treat colic, there were 17 complaints made about 17 chiropractors spread across 5 clinics. Despite having audio evidence that those clinics were telling members of the public that their chiropractors can treat colic, and even telling members of the public that their chiropractors were routinely treating babies who were suffering from colic, the GCC closed all but one of those complaints. And that one is still ongoing now. Mm-hmm. In fact, since then, as a result of what we saw as being a poor response by the GCC towards complaints made regarding their members, Laura informed the head of the committee that we'd be making 25 complaints every month against chiropractors until we saw some evidence that there was a willingness by the regulator to take the regulation of misleading claims seriously. Some complaints were related to colic. Others were related to things like sciatica, which they're not allowed to say they can treat, or whiplash, which they routinely say they can treat and they shouldn't. Some were to do with the misuse of the term doctor. All things that are clearly not allowed in advertising, and all things that all chiropractors should know they can't substantiate and so therefore should not be saying. It should be very, very easy for an effective and willing regulator to get these things right and to prevent their members from doing so. So by the end of 2016, Laura, from the Good Thinking side, he had actually made 300 complaints about chiropractors over these easily identifiable issues just in website advertising alone. This isn't even what they're saying in leaflets, what they're saying to patients, what they're actually doing. This is just what they're saying, they're admitting they're doing on their websites and advertising. Of those 300 complaints, we're now nearly two years after that started, a year after we made our last one of those 300. One of them was closed with no investigation. 4 of them were closed by the investigating committee. 3 of them referred to the ASA, and the rest haven't been touched. The rest are unresolved and haven't been moved on. They haven't been picked up.
Okay.
It's pretty clear that the GCC is the regulator of chiropractors. They're meant to be the regulator of chiropractors, not the regulator for chiropractors, the regulator of chiropractors. They should be doing their job because the lowest end of their job is protecting the public against people saying they're doctors when they're not, or claiming that they'll treat whiplash or colic. If you claim to treat colic when you can't treat colic, the worst case scenario arguably might be that you're wasting the parents' time and money, but you're manipulating the spine, and that's very, very dodgy. The worst thing that can happen, the worst thing that the GCC are not protecting the public from potentially, are cases like John Lawler's, cases where people are genuinely harmed, cases like your Kevin Sorbo's. This clearly is a failure of regulator, and the regulator has to start doing their job, has to start taking things seriously if they want to continue being seen as a credible regulator.
So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is tonight at our regular venue, which is the Vines on Lime Street. We've got something of a change of pace from normal because we've got Dave Annick coming down
apparently
to do
apparently we have. I'm not going to see it.
Edinburgh show. So Dave was the MC for QED. He's also a fairly talented magician. Turns out he's literally the best magician.
Literally the best magician. He'll be proving he is literally the best magician.
If the title of his show is to be believed. So that's at our regular venue, which is the Vines on Lime Street from 7:30. Alice, you're also doing a talk in Glasgow a few days ago.
A few days ago in Glasgow, in a few days' time in Brighton. So next Thursday, the 23rd, at 7:30 at the Carolyn of Brunswick, I will be talking about cancer cures.
Will you?
Nice.
Interesting.
Brighton's lovely.
Still not seen this talk.
I've never been to Brighton. Well, you've not invited me, so
you'll enjoy Brighton. Brighton's a lovely, lovely city.
I've got 2 cousins who are currently studying in Brighton, so I'm looking forward to.
There you go, audience of at least 2.
Yeah,
solid.
I doubt they're going to come. I think they've probably already got plans. They're both university students. It's Thursday night. I'm sure they will be drinking.
I see.
And Marsh, you're off to South Africa, aren't you?
Yes, I'm speaking at a quackery in the media conference in Stellenbosch at Stellenbosch University, just north of Cape Town.
Yes.
So I'm going to be talking about some of the work we've been doing with Good Thinking with the homeopathy stuff. Broadly, it's a talk about, it's grandly sort of pitched at pseudoscience in the British establishment, by which I mean the NHS, our work with regulators, our work looking at charities, our work looking at dentists and doctors, but not looking at individuals, looking at how we kind of look at the structures that allow pseudoscience to propagate.
Okay, cool.
Or it will be when I've written it. I'll have written it by the time...
By the time you get there.
I was going to say I'll have written it by the time listeners hear this, but I don't think I can commit to that.
You may not have done.
I don't think I can commit to that. I've got a long flight.
You're going to write it on the flight?
I'll tweak it on the flight.
You're going to write it on the flight?
It'll be written before
it's a solid number. I don't think there's anything wrong with writing on the flight. You've got a solid number of hours with nothing else to do.
I'll say it's internet connection's a problem. It's not even like I can fucking tether it to my phone. Yeah.
And also, I've got an event which is not a skeptical event at all, but I've got a new event that I've started in Liverpool called Mercycoat, which I'm shamelessly plugging on this show.
Are you doing a podcast on coding?
Possibly.
Will you mention this? Our events on it?
Oh hell yeah!
Okay,
I'll cross promote anything. I don't care.
That's fine.
But
what we need is access to more nerds.
Mercy Code is a talk for developers, software developers, coders, hackers, anything along those lines. The first Mercy Code event is on the 29th of November at Liverpool Science Park at 6:30 p.m. where we've got Ben Frayne, who's a front-end developer. He's going to be coming to talk to us about cascading style sheets. So I'm excited for that. That's good. We've got several other speakers lined up for that. We've already got January booked. We've got February booked. I'm quite excited for what we're going to do with that. But it's not going to affect anything we do on Merseyside Skeptics, of course. But it will be remiss of me if Marsh can plug his day job on the show. I can fucking plug mine.
That's fine. I mean, we're actually in your day job office right now, so it's fine.
So we literally are.
I did have actually two quick follow-up things that I thought were worth mentioning. One, I don't know if anybody saw the story in The Independent, it was in various other places too, about Robert Mercer, who's the billionaire Trump supporter who used to own part of Breitbart, who has now sold part of Breitbart, and in selling it, singled out Milo Yiannopoulos as one of the reasons he was selling it, saying we should never, ever have supported him, which I think is really interesting, because now I think the only publication that's ever praised Milo and never recounted that praise is the Skeptic magazine. I genuinely think the Skeptic magazine now stands alone in having praised him and not criticised Milo.
We should clarify, this is the US
Michael
Shermer's
Skeptic magazine.
Not
which
the British one.
Yeah, Michael Shermer's Skeptic magazine, which printed a 3,500-word, entirely credulous and praising article about Milo's book. The Skeptic now stands alone as having praised him and never criticised him, which I think is interesting. And it led me to something else, because obviously... I don't know if anyone saw the Brain Force Plus thing that we mentioned. We mentioned it in our acceptance for the Goop's Rusty Razor Award that you and I accepted on behalf of Gwyneth. And we talked about the fact that Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop sells a product which is identical chemically to the Brain Force Plus product as sold by InfoWars. And then Brain Force Plus started trending on Twitter because Paul Joseph Watson, is it? The fucking weirdo guy who's like the British correspondent for InfoWars. You'll have seen him. Goes by Prison Planet. Absolute.
Oh, yes, that guy.
Massive, phenomenal, cartoonishly, bellendish chap. He did this video talking about the first thing I do in the morning is take 2 Brain Force Pluses. And it was a ridiculous video, and everyone's starting to take the piss out of it. Turns out that guy also released a list of the 10 YouTubers that he watches without fail. Guess who was on that 10? It'll have been Carl Benjamin Sargon of Akkad.
Sargon.
Made the top 10. Now, this is interesting to me because obviously we got a little bit of flack from a couple of people from me pointing out what a bellend and how Carl Benjamin is not skeptical at all in his material. So it was, Marsh's politics are getting in the way. I said, no, it's not my politics.
Yeah, he's a
it's very skepticism. He's a 9/11 truther. So we now have literally one of the people who work at InfoWars who constantly tweets about things like the deep state and 9/11 truth and all these other conspiracy, an avowed conspiracy theorist who peddles bullshit supplements, picking out one of the only the top 10 favorite YouTubers being this one who is apparently a skeptic. Now, I'm sure we have listeners who disagree with some of the stuff that we say. I mean, hell, we hear from them, especially when we talk about Carl Benjamin. But I think if one of our listeners was to write to us and say, actually, I'm a homeopath who is also a 9/11 truther and I love your work, I'd question, A, whether they've understood my work, and B, whether I've made my work understandable enough to them. So, yes, the fact that... a 9/11 truther and massive conspiracy theorist watches and loves Carl's stuff doesn't necessarily say there's a problem with Carl's stuff, but you've got to question how skeptical that material actually is if someone who is as non-skeptical as that cites it as one of their favourite things to watch. So I think that's more evidence, not just that he's nothing to do with skepticism, but also the company that he keeps and the circles that overlap. So I thought that was quite an amusing thing to spot.
Well, aside from that, then, that is all we have time for.
Yes, I think so.
All that remains, then, is for me thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.